Hey there, everyone, and welcome back to Utility Sports. Today, our video is going to be focused on the Brooklyn Nets, who just lost last night to the Dallas Mavericks and are on a 4-game losing skid, and why I believe James Harden is actually the most valuable player in the NBA. I think he has been for quite some time now, actually. I'm very, very vocal about his ability to change the outcome of games, especially throughout the regular season. He puts teams on his back, and that's what today's video is going to be focused on, is how important he is to the Brooklyn Nets, why I think he actually is the most valuable player in the NBA at this point, and what we could see from the Brooklyn Nets if James Harden doesn't necessarily come back and get put back in the role he was in prior to his injury. So moving forward here now, I want to focus on the three words: most valuable player. Now, I know a lot of you are going to look at me and say, well, the Nets have this superstar lineup with Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, also Blake Griffin, of course. They've also got DeAndre Jordan in there. They've got a very filled out roster, and yes, of course they do. But let's not act like this roster has been phenomenal in James Harden's absence. When Harden hasn't played, this team has been bad. There's no other way to put it. If you look at their numbers, they have not been good when James Harden has not either been a member of their team prior to the trade from Houston or when he's been out with injury post-trade. They have needed James Harden, and when he's been playing, they've been good. When he hasn't played, they've been bad, regardless if Kevin Durant or Kyrie Irving are playing or not. The Nets need James Harden on the floor. Mike D'Antoni knew it. Steve Nash knew it. Management there in Brooklyn knew it as well. That's why they ended up pulling up the trigger on a deal where they gave up two young players in Karis LeVert, who's a really nice piece, gave up Jarrett Allen, who's been playing pretty well in Cleveland, and a ton of draft picks in that trade for James Harden. They knew they needed him, and that is what we have seen so far since he's arrived. He is the MVP, and here is why. These are facts as of May 7th of 2021. Obviously, some of these numbers are subject to change as we go out, finish out the last 6 or 7 games of the regular season here. So that is what I need to touch on. But the Rockets, since trading James Harden, have been 14-44. They're last in the Western Conference by about 3 or 4 games at this point. They have been a terrible, terrible team without James Harden. A lot of people have loved to meme James Harden saying, oh, well, he doesn't get them to the finals. He hasn't gotten Houston to the finals. See where they are without James Harden? Those picks are going to do them a lot of good because they're going to need them, because they will be picking top 5 every single year without James Harden. He was taking a team that didn't have the pieces. We're even looking at Russell Westbrook with Bradley Beal in the Eastern Conference right now. They're not even in a playoff spot. They're going to be talking about the play-in game for Washington. James Harden hasn't had the requisite talent around him to win an NBA Finals, and yet he's gotten his team close to the finals multiple times on multiple occasions against even better teams. Remember when he was going up against the Golden State Warriors and just about took that team over the hump? And if it wasn't for a Chris Paul hamstring injury, they would have been in the finals. I'm confident in saying that. And then the narrative around James Harden would have shifted. Everything is about the narrative, because a lot of the fans only listen to what the media is telling you about James Harden, saying, oh, he doesn't close games, he doesn't do this, whatever. You know, they don't actually know what they're talking about, especially when it comes to James Harden. And looking at the Nets this year, when James Harden doesn't play, either before the trade when they didn't have him yet, or after when he's been out with injury, they are 16-17 on the year. That is not a good record. That is putting you probably 7th or 8th in the Eastern Conference. If they played like that all year long, slightly below 500, that is not where this Nets team should be without James Harden. Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, even when they play together, haven't been winning a ton of games, even though they started out the season very well. I believe 3-0. They've been bumpy in a lot of ways. And yeah, you can expect that a little bit, figure out the chemistry and stuff. But James Harden came in and the chemistry was just fine, even though he was the newest member to the team. That doesn't make any sense except for looking at it from a standpoint, well, he's the best player on this team. He's making them click, and that's what he's doing, because when he is in the lineup, they are 27-7. The Brooklyn Nets are a much, much better team when James Harden is playing. And he is the lead guard on this team, and he's the leader of this team. It's not Kevin Durant. It's not Kyrie Irving. It's not going to be Jeff Green or Blake Griffin or DeAndre Jordan. It is James Harden. He is the perfect fit with every single player on this roster. Some people consider that him and Kyrie, maybe they're a little too similar. They've been great in the absence of Kevin Durant. And, some people might look at it and say, Well, when a star player doesn't play, of course your team's going to be bad. Really? Because the Brooklyn Nets without Kevin Durant this year are 25-12, and they're still 11-6 without Kyrie Irving. It looks like the only time that this team loses a lot is when James Harden himself isn't playing. They've been just fine without Kevin Durant this year, and they've been just fine when Kyrie Irving doesn't play. But for some reason, when James Harden is out, Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving can't pick up the slack there. Their offense stalls out. Watching them live, you can clearly see how much of a different product it is. James Harden is the pinnacle of half-court offense. Every single GM, when they're looking at evaluating players, should be looking for traits that a player can bring that is similar to James Harden. We're seeing it a lot with Kevin Porter Jr. for the Houston Rockets. I talked about that on the channel here over 2.5 months ago, 3 months ago, when he was still playing in the G League, saying that they need to bring Kevin Porter Jr. up because he's got some real half-court creation skills that the Rockets need to start utilizing and progressing and developing for him to be their lead guard of the future. And James Harden has every single trait you could look for in a half-court offensive player. He's great at getting to the rim. He's phenomenal in the mid-range area when he shoots them. He is one of the best shot creators from three-point land, probably second or third behind Curry and maybe Damian Lillard. He is phenomenal on all three levels as a scorer. He is a great, great passer, probably top three in the league and as a passer, in my opinion, probably behind Luka Doncic and LeBron James in no specific order. I think he's the third best passer. He's got a variety of passing angles. He's got creativity. He doesn't have to be in specific spots to hit specific passes. He's great in the pick and roll. And the Nets are just a lot better when he plays. He puts people in spots to do well. I feel very, very, very confident in saying this, that James Harden is the best player on the Brooklyn Nets. And I don't even think it's specifically close when you look at a holistic approach to basketball, what players can do what and how they function. Now, Kevin Durant, I'm not saying he's not a great player. He is. He's clearly still top 10 in the world. Kyrie Irving, a top 20 player in the world. No question about that. James Harden is the best player on this Brooklyn Nets team, though. There's no way to dispute that. If you watch the games, the way James Harden impacts the game, he impacts a lot more than Kevin Durant does. I think James Harden is just as quality of a defender as Kevin Durant, and he doesn't get to do the weak side block thing that Kevin Durant does standing at 6'11". James Harden actually has to play some on-ball defense. James Harden's also a better post-up defender than Kevin Durant, despite being much smaller because he's got stronger hands and a stronger lower base to his body. James Harden's just the best player on this team. There's no debating that. There's no disputing that. And if you believe Kevin Durant is, you clearly just listen to what the media is telling you and not actually watching the games yourself here for the Brooklyn Nets. Nets fans know it. When you're watching these Nets games, that when you guys have James Harden, you're a way better team than when you don't. And the same isn't true for Kevin Durant. You guys are still a great team when Kevin Durant doesn't play. So here's James Harden's numbers on the year. He's averaging over 25 points a game, which is kind of crazy because this is about a 10-point per game decrease from last year when he still didn't win the MVP because the media doesn't like James Harden for some reason. Averaging 8 rebounds a game. That's more than Kevin Durant, by the way. And about 11 assists per game, which is an insane number. He's come into Brooklyn. He's been the lead point guard, which I've been very vocal that he is just a point guard in a shooting guard's body. He's got the perfect frame to play the 2, but he's got the skill and talent to play the 1. Shooting 46% from the field, 36% from 3, especially with his difficulty of shots. Now, he doesn't quite have the efficiency of someone like Kevin Durant, but Kevin Durant shoots a lot more set shots, a lot more ISO post-ups in the mid-range area. James Harden's game isn't built the same way because he's a little bit smaller, and he's still having an impact on defense as well, posting over a steal a game and nearly 1 block a game as well, over about 2 blocks per 3 games at this point for James Harden throughout the year. He's had very good numbers. He's only played in 42 games this season, and that will be one of the things that does impact his chances at actually winning the MVP. But I'm saying that he is the MVP in terms of what the words actually mean. He will not win the award this year. I'm not suggesting he will, but that is my take on it. And then come playoff times, the Brooklyn Nets need James Harden. Without him, I see them being a team that probably makes it to the second round of the playoffs for sure, maybe the Eastern Conference Finals, and then they would fizzle out without James Harden. I think James Harden is the player that will elevate them to winning an NBA Finals ultimately. If James Harden and at least one of the other 2 stars are playing, I see the Brooklyn Nets winning the NBA Finals. Without him, though, I just don't see it happening. I think that they're a very, very good team. I think other teams like Milwaukee, though, would maybe give them a little bit more issues because this is the nice spot about bringing in James Harden, someone who's so good at getting his own shot, but also setting up others. Looking at the other teams in the East, they don't have enough pieces to match up with Brooklyn now, assuming James Harden is playing. You look at the Sixers, you've got Ben Simmons. Okay, who's he going to take? Kevin Durant, maybe James Harden, maybe Kyrie Irving. I mean, okay, you've got one guy on him. Matisse Thybulle, I'm sure you put him on somebody, but he is a terrible, terrible offensive player. You can't sustain that. Joel Embiid doesn't want to go out in space with any of those guys. Maybe Danny Green for a little bit, but again, Danny Green's not going to stop James Harden or Kyrie Irving or Kevin Durant. At the end of the day, the Nets have too much firepower when James Harden is playing, and they've got too much ball movement. Now, at this point, I think the Nets would be in a much better situation with James Harden on that roster for playoff time. Also looking at a team like Milwaukee, sure, you got Drew Holiday, sure, you got Chris Middleton and Giannis, but I don't think Middleton wants to be matched up with Kyrie or James Harden all game long. I definitely don't think the Bucks would use Giannis Antetokounmpo on ball against Kevin Durant defensively all series long as well. That would be a very, very tough situation for them just in terms of what their half-court offense is going to need. They're not going to have enough firepower either to keep up with the Brooklyn Nets when James Harden is active and playing. So will he actually win MVP? No, he will not actually win it. The media is already down to 3 players. It's going to be between Nikola Jokic, Joel Embiid, and Luka Doncic because that's what the narrative's saying. That's what the media members like Zach Lowe, Bill Simmons, and so on, that's who they're discussing. That they already have their idea. And partially, you look at it and say, well, James Harden's only played about 42 games. I mean, Embiid hasn't played very many more. To be honest with you, I think that Harden should still be in the conversation based on how bad his teams have been when he hasn't played. Looking at the Rockets this year, been absolutely abysmal all year long since trading him. And the Brooklyn Nets are, I mean, just a slightly below 500 team when he doesn't play. Despite having all this talent, it's kind of mind-boggling. But at the end of the day, it's probably going to be Nikola Jokic. He's going to win the MVP because the media wants him to win it. And he's played really well this year. No discredit to Nikola Jokic. The Nuggets are playing really well in the West. But at the end of the day, you have to look at James Harden. He's been a better player. And looking at past MVPs as well, for 1 second, too, I want to pause here quick and say, if Nikola Jokic is going to get all this credit for carrying the Nuggets last, 2 weeks when post-Jamal Murray injury, I mean, look at Luka Doncic all year. Kristaps Porzingis, I mean, at best has been inconsistent and out pretty often. I mean, Luka Doncic should be ahead of Nikola Jokic in terms of the MVP debate. There's no question about that in my mind. He's putting up similar numbers. He's doing it with way less talent around him. Everyone was talking about how good this Nuggets team is, that they have Michael Porter Jr. and all these young guys coming up. And they do. The Nuggets are a very good team. Luka doesn't have that. His running mate right now is Tim Hardaway Jr. when Kristaps Porzingis isn't playing. And sure, Tim Hardaway's been having some pretty good games, but he's not at that same level as some of those other guys. Luka Doncic has single-handedly carried the Mavs to the 5 seed this year, despite a whole flurry of issues on that team. You're looking at no rim protection, inconsistent center play all in all. You're looking at inconsistent wing play on a nightly basis. Backup guard play has been inconsistent. Jalen Brunson at times has been our second-best player for the Dallas Mavericks, but at other points you're looking at the Dallas Mavericks not really having a true number 2 scorer at all, especially on the nights that Kristaps Porzingis isn't playing. And taking a quick look at some of the past MVPs here, James Harden should have 3 of these by now. He should have 3 MVP awards. The one that he actually won, and then the past 2 that have gone to Giannis Antetokounmpo. I'm sorry, both should have gone to James Harden. We're seeing how bad Houston is without Harden now. It's quite obvious. I don't know why people can't open their eyes to it. I mean, he averaged 36 points a game. We're talking Michael Jordan level type of numbers, and while winning there in Houston was what he was doing. They didn't give him MVPs. It's about the narrative. They wanted Giannis to win them. I don't really understand why the narratives are such a big deal, but they usually are because they're like, oh, we didn't expect Giannis to take this step forward. We didn't expect the Bucks to be the 1 seed, all this, yeah, yada, yada, yada. I don't care what you expect. It's a regular season award. James Harden was the best player the last 2 years as well. In the NBA, you have to look at the numbers and say there's no way he wasn't actually for what the regular season presented. But he won't actually win the MVP this year. I'm not saying that he necessarily should either based on the amount of games he's played, but I think he is actually the most valuable player. When you look at it in a vacuum, the way that he impacts games, there's not someone else like him. Maybe you look at LeBron. LeBron still impacts games in that level as well, but Harden does it in so much more of a natural fit there with the Brooklyn Nets. I think that Nets fans are going to agree with me on this, that James Harden is the MVP there on that team. I think he's the most valuable player. I think he's the most important player. Obviously, I'm not saying that you can't just have James Harden and a whole bunch of bad players. We saw how that played out in Houston. You're going to get far, just not exactly where the Nets want to go. It's beautiful that they have those three players there together, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and James Harden, because KD and Kyrie work so well off of James Harden. That is what I'm suggesting here in this video. Hopefully you guys did enjoy today's video. If you did, make sure to leave a thumbs up. That would mean a lot to us. Also, subscribe if you are new to utility sports. Thanks again, guys, for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll catch you in the very next one.